Skeptics and atheists love to tout the power of science, and as a result, they'll often argue that religious people believe in magic. But that seems to assume that science isn't connected to the ancient practice of magic. Well, that's what we're going to be looking at today on this episode of the blogcast, so hang in there while the title card rolls. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. I, of course, am Triggerman1976, and welcome back to the blogcast. Thank you for tuning in. So, if this is your first time on the channel, please be sure and smash that like button. And if you are a returning viewer and you aren't already subscribed, please be sure to smash that subscribe button. And don't forget to ring that notification bell so you'll know when new content is available. Also, if you would like to support me and what I do here, the best way to do that is to head down into that description box and click on my link tree where you can find links to my affiliate store. You will find a collection of resources that I use that I believe will benefit you. Purchasing them from that store helps me and in turn helps you because I try to find the best deals available and put them in the store. Also, you can find links to my debut action thriller, A Turning of Shadow, and I also have a new book coming out on June 2nd, a book-length essay by the title of Creation as Creed, Creation, Evolution, and Biblical Truth. Links to all that will be in the description below. So, the magic of science. Believe one miracle story and you have to believe all miracle stories. That's an assertion that was made by skeptic J.H. McKenna a few years ago in a post over at his blog on Patheos. Is Patheos even a thing anymore? Anyway, his critique, I thought, was a pretty solid demonstration of the fact that there are distinctions that we, as moderns, often make that the ancients simply didn't. And because we, well, scientifically speaking, have become so isolated in specialization and so utterly arrogant in our understanding of the world that we forget exactly what it is we're looking at when we speak of science. Now, this isn't a dismissal of science as a human endeavor, as the scientific method is a tool of inquiry into the world that we inhabit or the various processes that occur in it. In fact, I believe that such enables us to more positively fulfill our creation mandate that's been given to us as humans. It's a powerful tool. And the problem is that humans have a tendency to conflate the possession of the tool with the origin of such authority to use it. Well, that brings us back to the allegation of hubris and how philosophically blinded that mankind has become. A false distinction. Science fiction author and inventor and futurist Arthur C. Clarke once said, "Any science or technology which is sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from magic." Indeed, if we look back into time from a socio-historical perspective, we can see that the magical arts of the ancient world were, to some degree, built upon a primitive, and this is speaking somewhat anachronistically, scientific basis. It's in examining the practices as they were conducted in various societies that we see the ancients made no functional distinction between magic, religion, and, say, medical science. And such distinctions among the various modern researchers are, in fact, imposed categories. We see this when we engage functionally with the subject of magic, is so often distinguished by elements of symbols and ritual actions. This serve to invoke the authority or invite divine participation in the exercise of power. The problem of distinction becomes clear when we consider that in science we cannot actually speak in terms of direct causation as much as theory of operation. For example, when we examine the story found in Genesis 30 of Jacob's placing sticks in the water trough to affect the flocks, and we attempt to examine and explain this scientifically, there's a great degree of consternation because there's no discernible material cause and effect between the act and its result. Hence, it falls under the category of magic. Similarly, jumping forward through the narrative of Scripture, through the life of Jesus and the apostles, even into the post biblical era, we can see that claims of miraculous healing are echoed in historical responses, which are preserved in accusations against Jesus in the narratives of the Gospels. This isn't intended to establish whether such acts undertaken by Jesus were in fact historical. Rather, the presentation assumes their historicity and reflects a common belief in a worldview which held that sickness and disease sometimes operated in concert with a supernatural component. And that supernatural component is what makes us nervous. The problem of causation. What is it that makes someone subject to disease? Scientists will opine about the symptoms of disease, the prognosis of disease, how people might become infected. But when it comes to identifying the cause of disease beyond infection by bacteria, parasite, or virus, they can describe what happens once those foreign actors are introduced to the body. But when it comes to asking the question of why people get sick, there's really no answer offered to the question. This is what I mean by the problem of causation. And by cause here, I mean the apparent hostility between species that supposedly share a common ancestry. If we are related, as some insist, why is there more hostility than hospitality? If we take the current modern narrative at face value, following its assumptions, shouldn't we see a world that's more benign or even beneficial rather than viciously malevolent as it's presented? And if you were to ask a doctor, why is it that the same bacteria which humans live in a symbiotic relationship and along with others in their bodies can suddenly become hostile and destructive results in a less than satisfactory answer. For example, some variants of E. coli bacteria are beneficial to humans while others can cause disease and lead to death. But as to why such a disparity between relationships exists, science has no grounds to speak of. That's simply the way things are. However, the ancients seemed to recognize that disease had to have a cause, and that cause was not one of simple mechanics. However, they seemed to know better than to attribute an ill motive to the world itself. Rather, they seemed to recognize that there was something that had it out for them, something truly malevolent. We, soaked in our modernist, supernaturalism denying, philosophical naturalism soaked mindset, might find that contention that there are unseen forces that inhabit the world that actually intend to harm us strange, if not ridiculous. Let's keep in mind the fact that the microscopic world of bacteria and amoebas and viruses was completely unknown to us until the recent modern age due to the invention of the microscope. We are still learning about the world that we inhabit, and not just what inhabits it alongside of us, but how we occupy it together. And when we consider the fact that there are so many instances of mutualism in the world where no harm occurs, we necessarily question why there are moments that the world seems so hostile and harm does occur. Enter the problem of evil. The question of hostility and harm seems contrary to the balanced symbiosis that we seek, and some argue that we should have with the world. It's why a child suddenly being stricken with a rare cancer or some other serious disease takes us off guard. The world seems to turn against those who have done it no harm, with a viciousness that seems out of character with what we should expect. We have words we use to identify the problem: cancer. We have words that we use to communicate a treatment: chemotherapy. And in the articulation of those words, we produce amulets, IV tubes, and potions, drugs. And we follow a ritual, treatment schedule, administered by magicians, doctors, nurses. And we dare to say that the science of medicine is somehow different from magic, especially when the intention in the end is the same. the healing of the one afflicted? Conclusion. When it comes to articulating a meaningful distinction between magic, at least in its socio historical context, and modern medical science, there is no real difference. The terms have changed, but the attitude is still the same, an attempt to muster power to control the elements. It's only based on an anti supernatural basis that one can even attempt to argue there is some kind of meaningful difference between the 2 points. However, when brought into alignment and examined carefully, no real dissimilarity exists apart from the worldview to which the endeavor is viewed. The supernaturalist recognizes that there are powers unseen that have authority and act as causal forces, and so they can launch attacks on mankind who they hate. The naturalist who denies anything beyond the immediately perceived is fundamentally at a loss to explain why cancer occurs, or how or why anything can be done to treat it, much less cure it. The supernaturalist, specifically the Christian supernaturalist, understands that cancers and diseases are symptoms of a greater problem, and the treatment of them in the here and now is only an analogy to what will occur in eternity when Christ raises his people anew. The naturalist has no reason to challenge the fact of cancer or disease, as there is nothing within such a worldview that says there should be anything different. When the question assumes to whether there is a distinction that can be made, it ultimately falls to the assumption of the worldview looking into the picture. Well, that's all for this episode of the BLOGCAST. If you enjoyed it, please be sure and smash that like button. If you found it interesting, please share it with your friends. And if you aren't subscribed, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Don't forget, you can follow me on X and Instagram at Sugarman1976, links to which are in the link tree in the description, along with links to all of my other content. Again, thanks for watching, and until the next video, God bless.